Thank you very much. Ministers, activists, dear guests, I'm happy to lend my voice and my mind to introduce this research that just recently got out, or last Friday, and I'm going to tell you about the findings of the research on sexual harassment. The story behind this is that in 2018, the Ministry of Social Affairs set out 2 task forces, one to map the incidence of bullying, harassment, and violence in Icelandic workplaces, and the other one to come up with reforms to be made within the labor market on how to limit the prevalence and consequences of sexual harassment, bullying at work. And as Kolbrún said earlier, I was the foreman of the task force to map the situation, and I, along others in that group, developed the design of the research. The research was conducted by the Social Science Research Institute at the University of Iceland, and this is the first time in Iceland where the situation of bullying and harassment in Icelandic workplaces is mapped for the whole population, whole working population, that is. The research is extensive as it covers a representative sample of the Icelandic working population and also the working population of immigrants. Furthermore, a representative sample of employers participated in the research, and the questionnaires used in the research give information on the background of participants, their working environment, incidences of bullying, harassment, and its consequences on the victim's working life and well-being. Instead of me talking you through the more specific information on the research, because it could take the whole day, I will refer to a report that has just been set out on the website of the Ministry of Social Affairs. And as I said earlier, in this presentation, I will focus only on result on sexual harassment. What we found is that 15.5% of the Icelandic working population has been sexually harassed, most of them in a previous workplace, but 3% in a current workplace. Looking a little bit further into this, we can see that 25% of women and 7% of men have been harassed sexually during their career. Within age groups, it is most common among those of 26 to 35 years, and for education, those with tertiary education are most likely to have been harassed. Sexual harassment is also found to be more common among those with disabilities than those without. And here it stands out that immigrants in the Icelandic in the labor market are much less likely to have been sexually harassed in their work than their counterparts of Icelandic origin. A partial explanation for this was found in the interviews where immigrants explained that some men count sexual harassment as being a part of their job, something you can always expect to happen. But I will come back to this later on in my talk. Most victims report that the sexual harassment took place more than 5 years ago, but still just under 10% of the victims have experienced sexual harassment in the last 6 months, and when that number is broken down to the total working population, 1.6% of Icelandic working population have been sexually harassed in the past 6 months, and we can therefore say that 1.6% of the Icelandic population has recently or is currently dealing with sexual harassment. For most victims, there was a case of the harassment happening once or twice, but for almost 11% of the victims, it lasted for 2 years, and another 10% it lasted for 1 to 2 years. But bear in mind that one single incident can also be serious depending on the nature of the harassment. Men are more likely to be perpetrators than women, but also we see that the picture is that men are more likely to harass women and women are more likely to harass men. But even so, we can see that for women, only 1 to 2% of them are harassed by women, either boss, clients, or co-workers. But the story is a little bit different from men. they are more likely to be harassed by either sex. And we can see that some of the men, we can see that 21% of men have been harassed by a male coworker, 25% by a male client, and 40% by a male boss. The numbers I have been giving you on sexual harassment are found by asking participants to read through a definition of sexual harassment and then answer if they had been sexually harassed at any time point in their career. But in the research, the participants were also asked about unwanted sexual behavior at work. From a list of 10 such behavior, participants were asked to state whether or not they had experienced any such instances within the work environment in the past 6 months. This is another way of measuring sexual harassment at work. While 1.4% of the population reported sexual harassment in the past 6 months from reading a definition of sexual harassment, 16.3% of the population reported at least one unwanted sexual behavior in the past 6 months from the list. In the answers on unwanted sexual behavior, we see much less difference in frequency for immigrants and participants of Icelandic origin. So depending on how we ask about sexual harassment, we get a different picture on the difference of immigrants and those of Icelandic origin. Here are the 5 most common unwanted sexual behavior. First, 8.4% had an incident of sexual joke or offensive remarks about their body or private life. 5.3% experienced unwanted touching, kisses, or hugs. Another 5% experienced inappropriate staring or leering. 3% experienced suggestions for any sexual activity. And 3% were shown pictures or photos with sexual content that made them feel offended. Sexual harassment has consequences for the victim's jobs. It commonly reduces the job satisfaction and can lead to feeling unsafe at work. It is quite common to resign from a job or consider resigning from a job, and yet some are laid off. And for some, that means that they get a new job with less salary than in the previous work. In the interviews, the victims talked about how the consequences are both immediate and how they can stay with them for a long time after the incident. Denial and anxiety were common, and it is also reported that within the working culture, denial can be empowered as the victims are blamed for overreacting. Self-blaming was also mentioned in the interviews. What did I do? A common question. Some mentioned their lives changed following the incidents, as it may have changed their outlook on life, and some also talked of difficulties with intimacy with their partner. Only 90% of victims filed a complaint to either the at the work or to the administration of occupational safety and health, or to other places. The most common reason for not filing a complaint was when the incident was seen as not being serious enough, or like not knowing who to turn to or who to trust, thinking the situation could worsen, and some also felt too bad to file a complaint. However, those who filed a complaint, for most of them it was successful, as it improved the situation within the work environment, but for 7% it made the situation worse. When looking into what in the working environment can be relevant factors in the case of sexual harassment, both work strain, job insecurity, lack of support from supervisors, or a male-dominated work environment come through as factors in the interviews. Furthermore, in the survey, it was found that sexual harassment is significantly more likely to take place when inequality is of any issue at the workplace. That is inequality seen as for gender, age, disability, or immigrants. Now, if we take a look at the employer side, first of all, I'd like to tell you that they are by Icelandic law obligated to prevent sexual harassment, bullying, gendered harassment, and any other violence, and take actions when such events arise, or even if it is only a suspicion of an event. The research, however, shows that there is a space for improvement on the employer side. 40% of employees have a policy in place on equality. 60% have performed a risk assessment, but only 7% of those have performed a risk assessment on psychosocial risk factors, which is the most important part of the risk assessment for prevention and intervention in case of sexual harassment. Furthermore, 10% had planned education for the employees on work-related sexual harassment. When it comes to interventions, it is most common to make an attempt to solve the problem on a personal basis, like talking to the victims and/or the perpetrators. And most employers, and according to them, most victims as well, prefer to solve the problem informally than going through a more formal intervention, which may involve asking witnesses or a research into the incidents. However, only 33% of the employers had a plan on how to handle any kind of instances, a plan that would lead them in taking actions towards solving the problem, reducing its consequences, and preventing a similar instance in taking place in the near future. Finally, employers are aware of the power structure that lies within sexual harassment, with a powerful perpetrator and less powered victim, but in some cases the employers find it difficult to intervene in sexual harassment as it is difficult to prove sexual harassment. Like one employer said in the interviews, "This is what bothers me the most. We are not that kind of company that fires someone for something another employee has told on him when we don't have proofs." And the victim was very frustrated. Understandable. I did believe her. The point is, we didn't have any proofs. So, sexual harassment is a serious problem within the work environment. We still have a long way to go in case to eliminate the problem. This study shows that there is a lot of space for improvement on the employer's side, who by the law are responsible for the health and well-being of employees. The findings of this research points out some gaps that can be filled. Now we have a task group that will focus on how to bring about that improvement, and they have a very important job on their hands. Thank you very much.